Hi chess fans, in this video we will look at the game between Magnus Carlsen with white and Vladimir Kramnik with black, played at the Tal Memorial in Moscow 2013. We will also have 13 training questions in this video, and you can always pause your video and try to find the best answer. Okay, Carlsen played d4, knight f6, bishop g5, the Tromposky attack. d5, e3, c5, and now the idea of the Tromposky attack is to weaken black's pawn structure by taking the knight on f6. And after g takes f6, d takes c5, white continues to break black's pawn structure up a little bit. As compensation, of course, black has potentially the bishop pair, which can be an asset in this position. Knight f3, and now Kramnik played knight to d7. Now, training question number 1. Why in this position Kramnik did not take out the pawn with the bishop? Pause your video if you want and try to find the reason why Kramnik played knight to d7. Okay, after bishop takes, white has the strong move c4, and this move really highlights the weaknesses in black's pawn structure, and it harmonizes very well with bishop takes knight on f6. To illustrate, let's have a look what would happen if black developed normally, if you want, knight to c6. White could then play c takes d, and after queen takes, e takes d5. We can see that black's pawn structure is very weak. The material is equal. Black has the bishop pair, but probably white is already a lot better here because white has the much better pawn structure. And what alternatives does black have? Black could take out this pawn, but then white can reach a comfortable position with queen takes, king takes, bishop takes c4, and the black king has been pulled into the center, and white has arguably the more comfortable pieces and pawn structure. This pawn here blocks the bishop for now, while white's bishop and white's knights are already very active. And because of the king in the center, this rook can also become more active quickly. Okay, so this might be the reason that in this position Kramnik did not decide to take out the pawn, but to play knight to d7 and then maybe take the pawn a bit later. Carlsen now played c4. This move still harmonizes well together with bishop takes f6. And now black takes d takes c4, plays d takes c4 because the knight also has the function of blocking the queen. Okay, now Carlsen played c6. So Carlsen also does not take the pawn on c4, but plays c6. Quick training question number 2. What is the purpose of this move? Okay, the purpose of this move is to tickle black's pawn structure a little bit. If white has played the knight here and bishop takes, for example, the bishop would take out the pawn while developing. And after c6, if black took the pawn, white has weakened black's pawn structure even more. Okay, that was the purpose behind the move c6. It's not too bad though, because black has knight to b6, protecting the extra pawn, and white plays knight to d2, c3, and after this exchange, white also has a potential weakness here on c3 while black has also received this potential weakness here. The game continued bishop g7, and now Carlsen played bishop to d3. Training question number 3. What is the purpose behind this move? Obviously this move develops a piece, but why does Carlsen choose this path of development? Okay, the purpose of this move is to attack a weakness in black's camp. Black has all these pawn weaknesses here, and this move is simply attacking one weakness here. It also has the nice effect that if black now castles, white can take this pawn with check and win a pawn this way. Whereas long as black has not castled, after the bishop, let's say bishop e7, if white was to take here, black can cage in this bishop like this. So the immediate purpose of bishop to d3 is to preventing black from castling as well. And the little bit deeper purpose probably also is that this weakness, in order to remove this weakness or to remove this threat and finally castle, black has to weaken himself even further. For example, by playing h6 or by playing f5. Both moves weaken the structure a little bit. Obviously, this moves makes the whole king side a bit weaker, and f5, which was played in the game, also opens up some squares here. Okay, so again, Kramnik chose to deal with this situation by playing f5, and in this position here, f5 has the benefit of taking a lot of squares away from this bishop and also gaining some control of some squares in the center. And we move on to training question number 4. What should white do in this position? If you want, pause your video and try to find a plan for white. Okay, in a position like this, where black is grabbing some space and potentially has the bishop pair, it's important to play an active move and to create some problems and some threats. So let's have a look. If white played the natural looking move castle, black might play queen c7 and maybe in the next moves also playing bishop b7 and getting a good play. And white kind of, you can see it already here, kind of is passive the entire time. Okay, so Carlsen played e4 before castling, and the purpose of this move is simply creating a threat. White is now threatening to take out this pawn, and if this pawn retakes, winning a pawn by taking with the bishop, because I mean, let's have a look. If black was to castle here, this sequence here, white would win a pawn. So e5, e4 is posing a threat, and also whenever your opponent tries to grab the center with pawns, it's always good to break and counter this grip on the center or this attack on the center immediately with your pawns as well. It's a very common theme in many openings to think about pawn levers to lever up the center. Okay, so this was the purpose behind e4 and probably a good plan for white in this position here. If black now were to take out this pawn, white would get very active pieces. And so black doesn't want to do that, but in order to protect against this threat, black played queen to f6. And if you want, the queen is now bound to protecting this f5 pawn to prevent white from taking here. And compare this with if white had castled and black would have had the opportunity to play queen c7. The queen is much better here on c7 than it is on f6. So that also underlines why e4, that brings the queen to this square, is in a way also provoking a weakness and creating a little liability for black in the position. Okay, in the meanwhile, black is now threatening to take c3. So white played rook c1 and both sides castle. Now, training question number 5. In this position here, what should be black's plan? Try to think about this position and evaluate what would be a good plan and a good move. Okay, in this position here, black's problem is this bishop. It doesn't really have so many active squares. If it moves here, it's blocked by this pawn, it's blocked by this pawn here. This square is controlled by the white bishop. So this is a little bit the problem here. At the same time, white's bishop is very active, controlling a lot of squares, pressuring both maybe the king here on h7, but also this pawn. So what could be a plan for black to kind of get rid of this problem and at the same time also take away a little bit of value from this bishop here? A good plan here is c5, and this is what Kramnik played in this position. This also has a function. This pawn here is a potential weakness. So by pushing this pawn forward and attacking with this pawn, you're also using this weakness to your strength. It is also the case that if this pawn manages to get to c4, it attacks the bishop, and it also fixates this weakness here on c3 that is attacked by the queen and the bishop. And if white were to play c4 to prevent black from doing this, the result would be that this bishop suddenly is not so active anymore, and well, this pawn here might become a weakness as well. And with black's pawn on c5, this bishop here suddenly has a nice diagonal here. So very instructive to see how in this position Vladimir Kramnik comes up with the move c5. Okay, Carlsen played a very good move as well, prophylactic move to be able to have a retreat square here for the bishop and also protecting this pawn. And after rook d8, white is following a similar plan, pushing this weak pawn forward and trying to create some problems and some attack. And now black played c4. Carlsen played bishop to f1 here. Very interesting, because this pawn is only protected by the knight, and white could have played, for example, knight takes c4 here. Training question number 6. Why did Carlsen not take this pawn here on c4? And why was Kramnik so comfortable pushing this pawn forward, knowing that it could be taken? Pause your video and try to find out why this might not have been such a good move. Okay, so after knight takes and bishop takes, white has an extra pawn. White has 6 pawns and black has 5 pawns. Okay. But let's have a look. After only a few moves, bishop to b7, attacking this pawn here, white has to play bishop d3 here to stabilize this pawn, because if the pawn was to take here, black can destabilize white's structure here and get a strong attack. So after bishop e7 and bishop to d3, let's have a look at this position here. What compensation does black have for the pawn? Well, in fact, black has massive compensation because the rooks have open files on which they can operate. This bishop is a monster attacking the king. This queen is actually now looking much better here that the position has opened up, because it can swing in for attacks on the king side as well. And together with the bishop, it is creating pressure on the c3 pawn. So even though white is a pawn up, this is a very good example of a position that, as you can see, Kramnik was pushing the pawn forward and Carlsen was not taking the pawn. Both players must have clearly seen that this position, that results after taking this pawn is good for black. It's a sort of position where probably black has a nice play and nice pressure from his pieces, and the worst thing that can happen is that he will win back one of these weak pawns. So in fact, giving up this pawn is not even such a big dynamic sacrifice. It is probably very straightforward that black would win back this pawn and transform some of the pressure in winning back the pawn later. So very instructive. So after bishop to f1, black took on e4, and knight takes on e4, attacks the queen. Queen moves, and the knight gets activated further, taking the queen again, and exchanging itself for the bishop. So white has kept pieces on the board, but also ripped black of the advantage of the bishop pair. Bishop b7, creating pressure on the knight a little bit. Knight goes to c5, attacking this bishop. And now black simplified white's pieces with an exchange like this. Maybe we have a look at this position here. After bishop to c6, black is attacking two weak pawns. And Carlsen deals with this by attacking the knight. But the knight doesn't move away, but the rook takes the pawn here. And question number 7, just really quickly, why did black in this position here play rook takes d4? Can white not simply take out the knight and win a piece here? Okay, yes, white can take out the bishop, but have a look here. If black retakes, this knight here does not have any squares to retreat to. And that's why the best thing that the white knight can do is to win a pawn here, win back a pawn. And in effect, this whole exchange that we have seen now was simply a simplification of pieces. Okay, white now plays bishop takes c4. The bishop protects the pawn. And we can see white has 3 pawns versus black 3 pawns. And the pieces coordinate nicely on the e6 pawn. Now quick tactical question number 8. Why can white not take the pawn on e6 and win a pawn with a check? Okay, very simple. The bishop can take, and after rook takes, white has the back rank weakness problem. Okay, so that's why after bishop to d7, white played h3, now threatening to take this pawn. So black comes in and protects the pawn, and white plays bishop to b3, maybe eyeing to move the rook in here. Okay, so let's pause a little bit here. Question number 9. What is white's advantage in this position? The material is equal, but white is actually quite better here. And why is that? Pause your video and try to evaluate this position. Okay, the answer is 2 reasons. First, black has a lot of weaknesses here. In an ending with rooks and bishops, this is very bad. and it's very likely that in this ending white is going to be able to pressure those weaknesses, and black needs to defend very carefully, use a lot of time and thinking resources, and maybe white will win a pawn and then be at an advantage. And the second reason is a little bit more subtle, but maybe even more important. Black's pieces are kind of all over the place, whereas white's pieces are coordinating nicely. For example, this rook and this bishop are coordinating against this pawn here. So because of these reasons, white is probably already much better in this position here. And in the following, it's very instructive to see how Carlsen uses this advantage and makes it even a stronger advantage and strengthens his position. Okay, king to e7, trying to centralize the king, and maybe also protecting some pieces here. Rook c to e2. Again, look how nice these pieces are now coordinating. The rook needs to drop back to a more passive square to defend. And now Carlsen played rook to e4. Okay, very interesting. Question number 10. What is the purpose behind this move? Okay, the purpose behind this move is that on e4 this rook is much more active. This rook is able to swing over and attack quickly any of the weaknesses that black has. At the same time, this rook maintains the pressure on e6. And the third, more subtle reason is that by moving this rook to e4, white also creates space to activate his second rook. And this is, for me, a very interesting feature of this move. And let's have a look how the game continued. Black played a3, rook a3. I mean, what can black do here? Black also tries to activate his rook, but his pieces are really so badly coordinated. And now white plays rook e1 to e3. Look at this position here and compare it to this position here. White already has an advantage here in this position, but with the move rook to e4, white is able to activate his rooks even further, and his position is even better now. Very interesting and instructive. Okay, Kramnik played h4, and white plays rook h4, attacking the pawn, and the bishop is forced to drop back. King h2, Carlsen tries to activate his king, bishop g6, and now rook b4. Training question number 11. What is the purpose behind this move? Okay, very interesting. The purpose of this move first is to attack this pawn, obviously. This pawn is weak, and this move attacks this pawn, and even though it is at the moment protected from this rook, by attacking this pawn, this rook now is bound to the defense of this pawn. So if white had played a different move, maybe this rook would have loved to move to a more active square and create some damage by itself. But by playing rook b4 and bounding this rook to the defense of this pawn, black's rook now has to stay confined in these two squares if it wants to protect the pawn, and this is not a very active position for this rook. Okay, but the other purpose that this move does is it protects the bishop on b3. So at the moment this bishop is protected by this rook. If this rook was to move, the black rook could take out the bishop. And by playing rook b4, this rook on e3 now becomes free. Because the bishop is now protected by the other rook, this rook can now move to active plans, and if you want, this rook here is taking over the defensive function that this rook was performing before. So rook b4 is a very, very instructive move because it at the same time restricts the activity of this rook and increases the activity of this rook. Very, very interesting. Okay, and if you want to go even deeper, you could argue that in this position here, if white had played rook b4 here with the same ideas and purposes, here black would have had the option of playing b5. Whereas by moving the rook over here first, forcing the bishop to fall back, king moves, and the bishop comes over here, and at this point playing rook b4. At this point rook b4 is even stronger because black does not have the resource b5 anymore. Okay, so very interesting maneuver, both the rook e4 move and the rook b4 move. I think it underlines Carlsen's strength to, when he has an advantage, to play moves that make the advantage even stronger, and we can learn a lot from it. Okay, king to f6, king g3, both kings activate, e5, king h4. Okay, king h4 is a very interesting move. Kramnik now played rook to d4. And why does this move look so inviting? And why is it not such a good idea actually? Why was king to h4 maybe even a little trap inviting Kramnik to play the move rook to d4 check? Okay, pause your video and try to find out why this is so, why it's understandable that Kramnik played this move, but why it is actually not such a good move. Okay, let's have a look first at why this might be a move here that in a tournament game you would also like to play, and why it is so inviting. Okay, it is so inviting because black is under a lot of pressure here. The rooks, white's rooks are very active, the bishop is very active, the king is activated here, and at the same time black has this rook, which is okay, but this rook here is terribly passive, and here are a lot of weaknesses. And even though this pawn is a passed pawn, those two pawns here are also blockaded by the white pawns, and it must be such a terrible pressure that black is under. And now look at a move like rook d4. If white takes here, because it's check and rook, now this rook is not attacking the pawn anymore and not protecting the bishop anymore. And if it is taken out here, this rook is also attacked and needs to move. And suddenly this pawn has become a passed pawn. And where can the rook move? It must keep up protection with this bishop, so maybe this bishop will become weak as well. So it looks like rook d4 gives white a lot of things, creating a passed pawn, eliminating this rook here, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so it's understandable that Kramnik played this move, but it's actually not such a good idea because white now has to maneuver rook takes, pawn takes d4, and the bishop and the rook coordinate very nicely like this. Check, and the king moves back to g7, and rook takes b6. So with this maneuver here, black has won this, has received this passed pawn here and exchanged the rook, but white is now a pawn up. Very interesting. So I think it's very interesting. The engines don't give king to h4 as the best move. It's actually not leading too much, actually. It's not even in the top 3 or 4 moves of white to play. Yet Carlsen played this move. And I think it's a very psychological move because Carlsen must have seen that after rook d4 he has this way to win a pawn. But it must be so hard for Kramnik not to play rook to d4 here. I think it's a very interesting move psychologically. Okay, the game continued after rook takes b6. The game continued d3, but the bishop can control the promoting square quite easily, and the rook can also come here. So this passed pawn is actually not so dangerous. The game continued rook a2, attacking the pawn. Rook a1 attacking the bishop would have not led to much, in fact. So rook a2, g3, king g3, protecting this pawn. And black is happy to exchange some pawns. h4, check, king takes, rook takes, king g3, rook to f6. Now, question number 12 in this video. The rook could have gone to a lot of places here. That would have resulted in the game that the rooks would stay on the board. For example, rook a2 or any other move. But Kramnik chose to play rook to f6, offering an exchange of rooks. Now, question number 12. Why is black happy to exchange rooks here? Black is a pawn down. Why would black want to exchange pieces? Okay, the answer is that Kramnik, of course, saw a drawn ending. After the exchange of rooks, which is what happened in the game, Kramnik saw king takes f6, and probably his thinking was that he is gonna push this pawn, and the black king has to run over and take out this pawn, and then while he does this king will invade here, and together with the bishop block these pawns from moving forward. And white only has the white bishop, but this white bishop is not enough to throw the king out. So black's plan is to draw by moving his king in here, and by luring the king out of here, because the king needs to take this pawn. So this is probably what Kramnik saw here, and which led him to offer the exchange of rooks. Now Carlsen accepted the exchange of rooks, and after king takes f6, the king tries to block the other king out. That's probably quite normal, but now Kramnik played d2, and after king e3, king e5, the black king is ready to invade white's position. Now, last training question of this video, question number 13. How can white, however, win this game? What's the idea for white to win this endgame? Okay, first of all, indeed, king takes d2, which seems like a natural move if you're calculating lines. White takes the pawn. This game, king f4, bishop to f3, and king g3 is probably drawn. I don't have an endgame table available here, so I don't know if white can somehow win this, but if we look at this position here, king e3, and now I don't see how black can invade, how white can invade black's camp without without black being able to hold and draw. So after king takes d2, I think it's fair to say that this is probably a good way for black to hold this position for a draw. But the idea here is that white can win with the move g3. And g3, after bishop f5, which is what happened in the game, h4, we can see that these pawns are coordinating with the bishop very nicely to protecting the king preventing the king from invading into the position. So the bishop is protecting the squares here, all the white squares, and the pawns are protecting the black squares. And together they kind of form a phalanx that the king cannot invade so easily. Bishop e6, now king takes d2, and the white king cannot enter the position. King e4, king e2, and you can see the king controls these squares, and these squares are controlled by the pawns. Bishop g4 check is maybe a little last chance, but exchanging the bishops here would actually win the game for white. So the bishop moves back. King f2, and now black cannot stop the pawns together with the bishop, because black would love to have a position like this, where he can be on a black square and blocking the knights, but blocking the pawns from moving forward. But all he got is a position like this. And now the idea is basically that white slowly moves the pawns forward, pushing the king and the bishop on the way, but it's a easily won ending. Little maneuvering here, and in this position here, Kramnik resigned. Okay, I hope you learned a lot from this very instructive video. Tromposky attack, creating problems in the middle game, and then a very instructive rook ending, and lastly a instructive bishop and pawn ending as well. Thanks a lot for watching.